Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health
Hello,
Show.
everybody. Welcome to the Raw Life Health Show. I am so excited. Everyone that knows me knows I'm a big fan of this astaxanthin, but not all astaxanthin is the same. This one's by a company called Valasta. And today I have a special guest. The special guest today is the actual owner and discoverer of Valasta Company, and the one that's getting the astaxanthin to us to get it in the most accessible form. This is Sam Shepard. Say hello to the audience, Sam.
Hi, folks. It's so nice to be back with you, Paul, and thanks for this platform so much.
Well, thank you again for returning. And the testimonials I've been getting from this are great. But I tell you, one of the greatest testimonials is people keep reordering it. That alone speaks. But everyone that takes it, they tell me how if they have arthritis, they no longer have the pain that they suffered from for years. People with cancer, their markers are coming down. And of course, the C-reactive protein, which measures the inflammation in the body when they take this, that's the proof. Because some people might not feel the difference, but I say measure your CRP and see if that inflammation come down. And they do. So we have so many videos, and I'll post them below in the links for people to see from the past with Sam about this amazing Valasta. But Sam, what's going on with now with it? It's been a while since we spoke to you. Do you have new testimonials or new information about Valasta or anything you could suggest?
Yeah, there's a couple things that have happened, and I don't know if you and I have chatted about this or not, but um, back almost 2 months ago, Tommy and I volunteered for a little experiment in San Antonio to voluntarily be catheterized to have some world-renowned cardiologists look at our coronary arteries inside our heart and up into our brain. And that the results of that, I had never had that done before. I went in first. We did a stress test and then a sonogram, a Doppler, and then went into the cath lab and they inserted a piano wire in and went up and they injected radioactive dye and they looked at all of our coronary arteries, our heart, and up into the carotid and into the brain. And I went that was on a Tuesday morning, about 6:30 in the morning, and the doctor came in and said he was astounded. I'm 70 years old. He said, "You have a coronary health." First of all, he said, "I got good news and bad news." And I said, "Well, give me the good news first." So he said, "I have no atherosclerosis. I fall under the 1% at my age. No coronary artery disease," which was all very, very good news. I'd never had it checked before. But he was absolutely amazed. There's no cholesterol buildup in the endothelial cells of the arteries. Um, and I said, "Well, what's the bad news?" He said, "Well, the bad news is we found a congenital heart defect, something I was born with and had no idea that it was even an issue. It's called a severe systolic kink in the lead in the coronary artery called the widowmaker, the artery that goes around your heart. Every systolic high blood pressure pump of my heart, usually the artery looks like that, but every time my heart beats, it kinks and cuts the blood supply off to my heart. He said it's been like that my entire life. And I said, "Well, can it be fixed?" He said, "No." He said, "We're not going to fix it." I said, "Well, how long can you?" Like I said, I'm 70 years old. I said, "How long can you live with something like that?" He said, "Oh," he said, "I'll give you another 30 years."
Okay.
So I'm not too concerned about it. Well, Tommy's cholesterol was running high for the last 20 years of her life. No medication to correct it. Her cholesterol was running 240 to 260, but her HDL cholesterol was high also. So he came in and talked to us. This is Dr. Keiss, by the way. He's the inventor of the angioplasty. He's the doctor to first perform it on a human being. And he actually has a stent named after him called the Kais stent. He can be looked up on the Wikipedia, on Google. He's the #1 cardiologist in Poland. I think he's ranked 4th here in the US. He has a heart cath lab in San Antonio. But he came in and talked to us and said that if he found something with Tommy, with her cholesterol having formed any plaque or anything in her arteries, he would fix it while he was in there. So she went in the next day, and he came out, threw open the sheet. We were in a little room, and he says, "I am absolutely amazed." He said, "I want you to look at this." So he pulled it up. We actually have a movie of it. She has no atherosclerosis, no plaque formation. He gave her a coronary health of under 20 years old, and she's 71. And he said, both of you. He said, Sam, he said, if it was just you, I could chalk it up to genetics. But he said, since it's in both of you, your coronary health is so extraordinary. He said, I can't chalk it up to genetics. And the only comment I made was, well, if we were from West Virginia, you probably couldn't say that. But but he found humor in the whole thing. He is now traveling the world, and he called his entire staff into Tommy's recovery room. He said, I want every one of you on Valasta tomorrow. And he calls me probably once a week now from overseas. And the story with him, I'd prefer him telling the story, but he had psoriasis from radiation, from doing so many catheterizations. I think the radiation sort of affected his arms, and he got psoriatic arthritis in his arms. And he said, you think Valasta would help with this? And he rolled his sleeve up, and it was a pretty severe case of psoriasis. And I said, yeah. I said we can stop that in about 7 days. And he looked at me and threw his head back, and he said, 7 days? I said, yeah. And he said, Sam, he said, let me tell you something. He said, I've had this for 42 years. He said, I'm an MD. He said, I've taken every drug known to man to stop this. And he said, as you can see, I still have it. And he said, now you're telling me that you can get rid of this in 7 days. And my only comment was, well, it might take 10. And he threw his head back again and just chuckled. And he said, I'm leaving for Poland. And he said, I'm going to take a bottle with me. So, well, about 7 days later, 2:00 in the morning, he called me from Poland. And he said, what is this? And I said, what do you mean? He said, no. He said, I'm absolutely serious. He said, tell me, what is this? I said, well, is there something that's gone wrong? And he said, no. He said, Sam, he said, this is the first time in 42 years I've woken up with no psoriasis. He said, what is this? So I proceeded to describe it to him, why it works on psoriasis, and all 3 types, rheumatoid, osteo, and psoriatic arthritis. And he said, the world's got to know about this. And I said, well, we're trying our best. And, we meet a lot of resistance. He said, you're going to meet a lot of resistance. And Paul, you're probably hearing the same thing from doctors, calling you a snake oil salesman and all that. And that's why I sort of stepped back. At this late part of my life, I don't need that negativity in my life. So we struck to go out into the market strictly off of people's testimonies. We don't do sales or marketing. We have a budget item in the P&L, but it's not.
Well, yeah. I know this. I know the testimonials. I have the interviews. I have the people on there, but I actually was threatened and that I had to take this off my website. And I couldn't even discuss it because of the claims that were being made. And you actually have a patent on this, like for cancer and certain inflammatory diseases.
Yep.
And I actually got by governmental officials, I won't say which ones, to tell me these claims, you're not allowed to make them. And I'm like, look, they're not claims, they're reality. This is what people are experiencing, and I'm just sharing the experiences. I'm not claiming anything. I'm just sharing
Right.
testimonials.
Yeah. Yeah. They are in the throes as we speak, and you know some of my history too. Several years ago, how they came after me, but this is not going to stop. This is a 1.5 trillion dollar a year industry just in type 2 diabetes. When you look at cancer, it's another $1 trillion a year. When you look at heart disease, it's another $1 trillion a year. So this is not something that people want to give up with that kind of income flowing into their companies. So, it's like an attorney once told me. He said, they can't kill you and they can't eat you. Well, I've narrowed that down that they can't eat you. Um, some of the threats have been fairly violent type threats. But I'm 70 years old. This story needs to be told.
Absolutely. So tell everybody that's new to this, because I know a lot of people saw this. Tell them in a shorter version what Valasta is and I mean, it's excellent for prevention. I don't have
Yeah.
arthritis or cancer or things like this. I take it for prevention, but tell people the best disease this works for and what it is and why.
The uh, the ones that we see the greatest thousands of cases now, we probably have larger folks than any clinical study that's been done, but primarily irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, for example, autoimmune diseases, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, cancer. Um, the cancers are can be fairly unique. They're very dose dependent. In some cancers, we now have people using it in conjunction with their chemo and their radiation. And we received another patent in November of 2022, about 6 months ago, on using Valasta to mitigate radiation burns from people who are getting radiation treatments. We had a series, probably about 30 to 35 people that were taking radiation, and they were on Valasta. And then we had thousands of people who take radiation without being on Valasta. Well, they all sort of sit in the same room, and the people that are not taking Valasta were ending up with pretty severe burns on their backs, depending on where the radiation was aimed. But it can be on their back, on their front. Um, but they all, a very high percentage, experience these radiation burns. Well, 100% of everybody that we know of the 35, none, even though they were receiving the same sievert level of radiation, none got radiation burns. So the doctors originally thought on a couple of them, they made them come back in because they thought they had misappropriated the radiation. They didn't give them a high enough dose. But when they checked the records, they found that they were receiving the same sievert level radiation as the people that were getting the burns. The only difference was the people that did not get burns were using Valasta. That's the whole premise of why astaxanthin, or the glucosidic or liposomal form of astaxanthin, is produced by the algae, is to protect the algae from um, electromagnetic radiation, from ultraviolet all the way down through the visible spectrum and into infrared. It protects that. So, with type 2 diabetes, it does not work on type 1. We're not seeing any effect at all, significant effect, statistical effect on type 1 diabetics. Type 2s, within just a few days to a week or so, they start seeing drops in their blood sugar levels. It depends on what their initial starting point is. But their lows will start to get lower and lower if they're on medication, to the point that they've got to start reducing or cutting out their medication, whether it's metformin, insulin, um, Jardiance. And in about 30 to 60 days, they're no longer type 2 diabetics. So that is a huge proof right there that this is inflammatory. And our patent, which is, let's see if I can do this, 11,065,269. That's the number of the U.S. patent issued by the U.S. Patent Office. And then that was in July of 2021. And the title of that patent is a method for the process of using astaxanthin for the treatment of inflammatory disease, particularly for the treatment of cancer. So the FDA can be wrong. And in a court of law, typically the truth prevails. So if I've got a government agency called the Patent Office that actually looks at technology, has granted me a patent on this, and the FDA says that you can't use it, they have to provide the basis. When we have all the NIH studies, it would be very difficult for the FDA now, because it would be a jury trial. It'd be very difficult for the FDA to win that case based on the way that this has all come about.
Now, what is NIH? What does that stand for?
NIH stands for the National Institute of Health. It's a U.S. Research organization, and they have now over 1,000 peer-reviewed articles of this product and the activity of it. So this is not even close to snake oil. This is probably researched more so than the COVID vaccine was ever researched. But it interferes with the economy or the economics of so many pharmaceutical companies, and the FDA is using their power to negate it.
Well, and there, for people that don't know, there's the patent right there. The patent number is right on the bottle, and this is what I've been taking, and my clients have been taking, and I definitely recommend it. Dr. Fred Bishop, who's 93 years old right now, he told me about it and the experience he's had with his patients and cancer. And I just can't say enough about this. Now, I do want to mention this is called astaxanthin. Most people can't pronounce that, but it's astaxanthin. It's an algae that comes in some lakes, and but you can go and get astaxanthin on the internet. You can get it at Walmart and so on. But those are not the same as this one, because even though the main source is astaxanthin, Valasta has the patented process of how to get it in a form where it's more absorbable. Can you talk about that a little bit, Sam?
Sure. I'll start from the beginning. The algae called Haematococcus pluvialis actually produces astaxanthin in a high-stressed environment. When its pond begins to dry out, it doesn't want to die, so it produces a red pigment called astaxanthin to block the intense sun rays, the radiation coming from the sun. So it can live in the soil 100 years until it rains again, and then the algae will rejuvenate itself. So what is done is the algae is grown in sealed vessels. There's no contamination. Then the algae is extracted. Now, the astaxanthin that exists in the natural form inside the algae is in one of two forms, or both. It's either what's called glucosidic astaxanthin, which means it has a sugar molecule attached to the astaxanthin. And that's how the algae moves the astaxanthin to its membranes, and it can move it. The other one is liposomal, where it's a fatty acid attached to the astaxanthin. That's the way it exists inside the algae cell. Well, when the algae cell is harvested, and we put it through a process called supercritical CO2 extraction. It's a high pressure. They use carbon dioxide as the solvent, and the astaxanthin is dissolved by the liquid CO2 at that point. It's not gas, it's liquid. And then that liquid is filtered, so the biomass stays back, and only liquid CO2 that has the astaxanthin in it goes to the next vessel. Well, under that pressure, the glucose and the lipid is split off of the astaxanthin. So when we bring the astaxanthin off through the filter and we lower the pressure, the CO2 turns into a gas and comes off. It leaves pure astaxanthin, the astaxanthin molecule itself. And for the longest time, I thought that was going to be the cat's meow because I really thought that the activity was in the astaxanthin. So the purer that I make the astaxanthin, the higher the efficacy of it. It turned out not to be true. So that astaxanthin molecule is not as absorbable as if it's in the glucosidic form. So I developed the process that ended up being patented on how to reattach the sugar, the glucose, back onto the astaxanthin. And our efficacy rate is now 8 times higher than if you buy the astaxanthin off the Walmart or the Costco. It's 8 times more absorbable. So to get the same effect, for example, the NIH in its studies was using pure astaxanthin concentrations of about 400 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. 400 just to get the disease under control. We operate at 1 milligram per kilogram because ours is in the glucosidic form and it's all absorbed through the intestines. That was the big change.
Amazing, amazing. And you're the only company out there that's selling astaxanthin in this form, and
That's correct.
it makes a big difference. So everybody that's watching, if you've never taken astaxanthin before, the Valasta one is the one you want. The link's below the video. But if you have taken astaxanthin and you weren't impressed with it, I promise you, try the one by Valasta, and you'll see the difference. Now, besides the amazing anti-inflammatory results that you get with astaxanthin, there's 5 things I want to mention to you because you have a brochure and you talk about these things. And maybe you could briefly mention what each one of these are and why it's just so impressive that it's so much higher in these things. It says it's what is it? Tryptophan 1.6 times stronger than tryptophan. So
Yes.
explain what the tryptophan is and what do you mean by 1 times 6? Give us an example.
Yeah. What we look at is what's called ORAC score. ORAC is ORAC. It stands for oxygen radical adsorption coefficient. Now, that is a measure of the 4 free radicals and the inflammatory response and the ability of these compounds to either neutralize or convert the molecules into a more systemic type of a product. The 4 free radicals that it refers to when it means oxygen radical adsorption coefficient. Oxygen radical is either superoxide, singlet oxygen, the peroxyl, and the hydroxyl free radical. Those 4 cause 92% of all human inflammatory death. The Valasta neutralizes all 4 of those. But the way we measure the efficacy of it is we look at the ORAC score, like turmeric, which is a big one. Tryptophan is another one. Vitamin C is another. They all have ORAC scores. Turmeric is one that comes to mind. It's very good anti-inflammatory. It has an ORAC score of 127,000. Now, astaxanthin has an ORAC score of 2.2 million.
Wow.
It has the highest ORAC score of any natural antioxidant known to exist in nature on a commercial level. So when we begin to look at this, we begin to look at vitamin C, for example. Vitamin C has an ORAC score of, I don't know, maybe it might be 100,000, maybe. But the problem with vitamin C is when you do these calculations, you have to negate the inflammatory response by taking them. So if you take high dose vitamin C, Vitamin C, vitamin B, vitamin D, vitamin E. These are what's called pro-oxidants. They have to be processed through the liver. As you increase the concentration of those, it puts a stress on the liver, and this liver then causes a inflammatory response in the body. That's why vitamin C in small dose seems to work just fine. In very large dose, it's detrimental. It can actually cause real serious problems with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and even kidney failure in some juvenile and adolescents.
What would you say is a high dose when you say high dose?
I'm looking at 30,000 international units. If you're down in the 5,000 international units to about 15,000, it depends genetically on each individual and their liver health. But in any case, it has to be processed through the liver. You're going to get some inflammatory response. It's how you address that inflammatory response prior to it causing a disease. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And the sad thing is, I mean, most people don't take any vitamin C in a supplement form at all. And the ones that do, they're taking like 1,000 a day, which is like nothing almost. And here you're saying, what's the equivalent to taking Valasta in terms of like vitamin C, for example?
Yeah, vitamin C is one of those that the ascorbic acid, fights diseases like scurvy. If you're not having gum disease or scurvy or losing teeth, or you're not short vitamin C, then you taking vitamin C is only an inflammatory or an anti-inflammatory. Um, um, the current form of the Valasta we have is over 6,000 times more potent than vitamin C. So you can forego as an anti-inflammatory any other compound. There are some vitamins that have other effects though, like vitamin D. Vitamin D for viruses and for COVID, it helps suppress what's called the ACE2 receptor. So I recommend people in the life of COVID now. I recommend people take vitamin D not because it's an anti-inflammatory, but because it binds the ACE2 receptor and can stop the incursion of the virus into the cell. So there's another reason why we take vitamin D and zinc, other than as an anti-inflammatory. But everyone should have their HSCRP run. Ask your doctor to run that. If that number is over 3 milligrams per liter, and you got to be careful with the units because now they're running it as milligrams per DL or milligrams per deciliter. If it's reported as milligrams per deciliter, you have to multiply that number by 10. So I have a case right now where a person with cancer went in, had their HSCRP, and she called me up and she said, "Why do I have cancer? My HSCRP is 2." I said, "Well, what's the units?" So she goes back to her blood work. She said it's 2 milligrams per deciliter. And I said, "Well, ma'am, that's 20. Your inflammatory disease state is out of control. So you can actually make the wrong decision based on the units. You got to be careful when you're looking at that blood work. Make
And
sure it's milligrams per liter."
H HS CRP. HS stands for high sensitive, correct?
Correct. High sensitivity C-reactive protein.
Because when you take a test, there's just a regular C-reactive protein, but there's a high sensitivity one. So if people are taking a test, they should take the HS one.
Correct. That'll
And
give
when
you a definitive number.
and when they get the results with that number, say this again so people can read this correctly and not get mistaken. There's two ways that it's being run these days. So one way is clearly where the way it should be under 2, and it's what's that way?
Yeah, the units should be milligrams per liter, mg per L. That's the way that and as long as you're under 3, that's normal inflammation just
And
to keep cells going.
how will people know if they're taking it that way? Because when they get the result, it'll say, or how will they know?
Yeah, to the right, they have to include units on their blood work.
Okay.
So you have to look all the way to the right of the number, and it'll have the units there, whether it's mg per L or mg per DL.
Okay, so
It-
now that was per L. So now you're saying if it's per DL, then it's under 3 with a definitive number.
You got to multiply that number by 10
Multiply that number by 10 if it's DL. What does DL stand for?
deciliter.
Deciliter. So that's
Yeah,
a
it's
smaller
one
amount.
tenth.
So, okay,
Correct. It's 1/10 of a liter.
got you. So then, so if the test was taken in that form and we say under 3, somebody might think they're doing great, but then if you multiply that by 10, now looking at 30, and
That's exactly right. They're in a
however,
terrible
I got a
inflammatory.
question for you here. If somebody is 1 on one test and you multiply that by 10, then you're at
That's
10.
10.
So what's the lowest can you be? Can you be below 1?
You can't be 0, but typically what we look for on a milligrams per deciliter per DL is from about 0.05 to zero point 0.3. If it's milligrams per liter, you want to be at um, really pretty low numbers. You want to be 1 to 3. It's ideal to be somewhere around 1.5 to 2. You need some inflammation. That's how cells communicate with each other. So it can never be 0.
But 10 would be considered good if it was measured the other way. 10 would be like a 1, right?
Uh, well,
Because if you're taking a test with the deciliter
right.
and it comes
Yeah,
out
yeah.
and
Yeah,
if it came out a 10, that would be like a 1 on a milliliter when the one you're talking about, that's where it should be, right?
if you had a 10 on milligrams per liter,
Not per
that
liter,
would
per deciliter.
that's 100.
Okay, so a 10 milligrams per liter would be a 10.
Multiply. Oh, okay. If you had a 10 milligrams per deciliter, that's the same as 100 milligrams per liter.
And that's okay. Okay, but now
No, that's not okay.
I know, but what if you had a 1 on the milligrams?
Okay, if you had 1 milligram per deciliter, you multiply that 1 times 10, that's equivalent to 10 milligrams per liter. That's bad news. So you might think that you've got a 1. Reality is you've got a 10 milligrams per liter. And that's why those units are so important. And there is a lot of confusion. I'm glad you're going over this because there is a lot of confusion. And I get those calls. Why am I stage 4 cancer? My CRP came in at 2.5. And then I asked him, I said, is it milligrams per deciliter? And they said, yes. I said, well, that's 25. You got to multiply that by 10 to get it everything to milligrams per liter. That's what we use as the standard. And
So
you want to be under 3.
but if it'll be under 3, but what if you did it the other way? So if it comes back at like I mean, how low can it come in if it's the deciliters? How low can it come in? The milliliter you said is under 3, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The deciliter would have to be negative to
0.05. Yeah, you could
0.05.
have
I
an
see 0.05. That makes sense because now okay, it'd have to be under 1. 0.05.
yeah, yeah. So so if you had 0.05 multiply it by 10, that's 0.5. That's about as low as I've ever seen it. I've seen 0.3s. Some of that's lab error when you get down in the lower range like that. Typically, anything from 1.5 to 2.5, that's the range. You've got good communication at the cellular level at 1.5 milligrams per liter. You start getting into excess free radicals when you get over 3 milligrams per liter, and your body's not dealing with it.
All right, 2 questions. So the first one is if you're at 1.5, let's say, and you times that by 10, so it's not equivalent to times by 10, it's times 10 is like
Gets you to milligrams per liter.
so 1.5 would be what? 10.5 milligrams per liter.
1.5 would be 15 milligrams per liter.
But if it's measured
1.5,
but if it's measured that way, then it's okay. It's 15.
no,
No.
you have to be under 3 milligrams per liter. That's the standard. So we have to get apples and apples. So if they run a pair, they run the milligrams per deciliter. You got to multiply that number by 10 to make sure you're under 3 milligrams per liter.
Okay.
That becomes the real issue when people are trying to understand their blood work.
But what's one equivalent to is what I'm saying. So if they
Okay,
measure, that's what I mean.
okay, 1 milligram per deciliter is equivalent to 10 milligrams per liter.
And we want to get it between lower than
3.
3 on both sides or one side.
No, just on the milligrams per liter side.
That's what I'm saying. The milligrams per liter. If that's one, what's this side gonna read?
On the milligrams per deciliter,
Yeah,
it's going to read 0.1.
got you. Okay, okay. That's how people can measure it. Okay.
Yep.
So confusing for people. I don't want people to worry, and I want people to be aware if they do have high inflammation. So it's important people know this. But either way, everyone get your CRP tested, and the Velastas is what's going to take it down. And getting back to my other question, Sam. So vitamin C. So it says the ORAC score is 6,000 times stronger than vitamin C. So if somebody's taken Valasta, since it's different than the vitamin D, but it's not other uses for
Right.
it, do they need to take vitamin C?
No, they do not. Not unless they're treating for a vitamin C deficiency or scurvy or dental problems. There's other reasons, but typically in our bell peppers, in our colored vegetables, we get all the vitamin C we need. It's almost a raw. We lose some when we cook it, but in a raw vegetable, eating a red pepper or a yellow pepper, you're getting plenty of vitamin C there. In that, well, you're into the raw diet, the same as Fred Beachy. There's some real advantages of being in a raw diet.
You
In
think
that
so?
you don't, yeah, in that you don't get the destruction or the oxidation of those. The only reason we cook food is to kill pathogens. Typically, that's why we have fire, and that was the only issue as to why we cook. We don't want disease.
Well, I mean, now maybe on a scientific standpoint, that's true, but people started cooking their food for flavor and taste and texture, right? Because when the cavemen started cooking food with fire, they didn't know much about the pathogens. They just wanted to make the
No, but they
animal that
knew.
they caught in the field more easy to chew, right?
Right, but even from that perspective, it's how we found out about poisons. You ate a red berry, you died. Well, I don't want to eat that red berry anymore. Well, I eat a diseased deer with worms coming out of it, and I end up with I go crazy from parasite infestation. So but they knew that if they cooked it, cooking killed everything. It changed everything. Um, but yeah, we have acquired a taste for cooked foods and greasy foods and fatty foods and
I mean,
all
I'd
that.
say it's the most. You might disagree, but I'd say it's the most addictive substance on the planet.
Oh, it is.
You know,
It is.
and it
I
makes it worse that the major companies are putting all these additives to make it even more addicting.
I've changed. Uh, I'm not quite a Fred Beachy. I'm not even close yet, and I'm not even close to a Paul Neeson. But um, I've changed the ratio in my diet. For example, I eat very little red meat. I'll eat some fish and chicken, but probably 60%, maybe 70% of my diet is vegetables, and that's it. So I'll eat nuts. I eat a lot of vegetables, and periodically, maybe I'll have a piece of fish broiled, or a piece of chicken broiled, and maybe once a month. Um, depends on the situation I'm in. I may have um, red meat in some form or fashion, but I understand the risks associated with it, especially in my case, I can't eat a lot of iron containing like kale or spinach or red meat because I had the polycythemia. I had the um, myeloproliferative type of cancer, which is extremely deadly. Um, so I don't want to go back there, and it usually shows up as a increased level of iron in your bloodstream.
Sure. So let me ask you this, Sam. If somebody has inflammation at a 1, let's say, can they still have an inflammatory bowel disease, or it'd be pretty hard to do so?
That's a great question, Paul, because inflammation shows up in two forms. The CRP only measures systemic inflammation. So if your whole body is under oxidative stress, and that can be from a fight or flight reflex, an adrenaline kick, high stress in your family life, anything that sends those epinephrine, norepinephrine throughout your bloodstream, it's processed in the liver. The liver will produce the C-reactive protein, which is indicative of systemic inflammation. That's the worst type because the disease can propagate anywhere in your body. Now, you can have what's called local inflammation. So, if you've got, for example, a perforated bowel, or you've got diverticulitis, where you've got an abscess local in your colon, then your body will send out and create a local, sort of like a wound. It gets red, gets puffy, gets pussy. And if that goes systemic, like in sepsis, you die very quickly. But in some cases, it will end up going back to the liver. We'll be able to see that local inflammation show up with the CRP. But it doesn't work that way in most cases. You can still have irritable bowel caused by let's say a tapeworm, a parasite in your bowel. Your body's going to try to fight that parasite or that bacteria, and it's going to create a local inflammatory response. It's not going to show up in your CRP.
Well, isn't cancer mostly localized? I mean, except when I'm talking advanced spread stages, but isn't like beginning stages localized?
The disease is, but the cause of cancer is systemic oxidative stress. And that's why it's so ubiquitous throughout all of the tissues in the human body, because each individual is different as to where they present. Some people get brain cancer, some people get lung cancer, some people get colon cancer, kidney. That's systemic. We can actually see that with their oxidative stress level. Um, if it was just local, everybody would just get cancer, say, in the colon. Cancer is one of those systemic oxidative stress caused diseases. Type 2 diabetes is the same way. Arthritis is the same way. It can happen anywhere in your body.
So with that same
And that's
thinking,
called,
because so with that thinking, can somebody have a low CRP and still have cancer?
they can.
Okay.
And where we see it is that if you're not dealing with the localized inflammatory issue and it stays inflamed and becomes chronic, not acute, but becomes chronic inflammation at that localized site, those cells are going to become damaged and they're going to mutate. And you can get a local um, precancerous cells that over 5 to 15 years will present with a tumor. We see this in colon cancers with polyps in the colon. Those polyps are localized inflammatory responses to something that irritated the bowel at that point. So your body in response tries to encapsulate it. It could be a virus, it could be a bacterium, but it creates a cyst. Now, as that thing grows, it can become more and more inflammatory, and those cells are going to be destroyed. Not all of them are destroyed, some mutate. If that polyp is in there for any length of time, you've increased the probability that you're going to generate a cancer cell. So that's why they always want to remove polyps from your colon. and they're called precancerous as a result. But that's a local inflammatory. Those people may never have had any high CRPs at all. So what we eat and how it ends up in our waste is absolutely crucial. The longer you have, especially in the colon, because any toxic materials or irritants that make it through your small bowel and into your colon, when you begin to extract water from that in your large bowel, you concentrate the toxic effect. You increase the concentration of the inflammatory. That's why we don't see cancers in small bowel. We see cancers in the colon.
Wow, no, very interesting. So I'll get into the Valasta here. We were discussing this. So it says 6 times stronger than vitamin C, 3 times stronger than the reversatile, 800 times stronger than CoQ10, 4.9 stronger than carotene, and 1.6 times than the lyptopene. So with these numbers, I understand what you were saying with the ORAC score and everything else, but okay, 600, 3,000, and it's 6,000, but what's 1.8 and 4.9? That doesn't seem like much, but like what is 1.6 or 4.9? Because carrots are a lot of things that people take. They juice and they take a lot of carrots, and carotene comes from carrots, but 4.9, is that a big difference than just juicing carrots, or is it not necessarily?
Yeah, you have to eat 4 times as much, basically, is what we're saying. But there's also an absorption issue. Beta carotene is one of those carotenoids that's also a pro-oxidant. So you can get to the point where you've accumulated so much beta carotene that you can get into fatty liver disease. We sometimes see this with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or cirrhosis in babies that are fed huge amounts of carrots in their diet. They'll actually turn orange, but you can get into some liver dysfunction. But those are fairly easy to resolve. You simply remove it from the diet, and if given 3 to 7 days, it'll usually correct. When we look at ORAC scores, we look at them in the laboratory. We don't look at absorption, the rate of absorption in the diet. We look at it strictly in measuring in the laboratory. So when the difference between 1 and 1.4 or 1 and 1.6, it's just the way it's measured. Now that 1.6 may not be, when we factor in the rate of absorption, shoot, it might be 1,000 times better to take the 1 than it is the 1.6. It's not a perfect ratio. So those are just rules of thumb that we use, but we look at not only the ability to work as an anti-inflammatory, we look at the result of it being or causing an inflammatory disease state in the liver or the kidneys. And they're called pro-oxidants. We live our life in balance between pro-oxidants and oxidants, or antioxidants. So we have pro-oxidants that cause inflammatory disease. We have antioxidants that neutralize the pro-oxidants to keep you from getting disease. Now, naturally, up until a certain age, we're producing tremendous amounts of antioxidants in the form of glutathione and what's called SOD, superoxide dismutase. But as we get older, those levels drop off. So the pro-oxidants win. And if we have chronic pro-oxidant levels, we end up with a disease and we die from that disease. We got to keep that balance in line. And having all of the antioxidants that's contained in vegetables, you've got to eat enough of those. And it's not just the quality, it's the quantity that you can get in. You can affect the quality by the way it's grown. You can, and it might mean that you have to eat 4 times more to get those antioxidants into your body.
I understand. All right. Well, what can we do? What can we do to help people realize how amazing uh, this is, and for them to try it? I mean, what encouraging word can you give people? Because people, you need to try this. I mean, this is first of all, it's a food in a supplement form. It's natural. It's kosher on every standard. I mean, there's nothing that would make this non kosher. It's vegan, and I mean, like I said, I've been eating a raw vegan diet for 30 years, and I still take this. So what's your word to make? Because I know people that have cancer that they don't want to do anything different than what the doctor says. So what can you say, Sam, before we close?
Okay, the first thing I'm going to say is you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. My whole purpose is to pre- at least present viable scientific information to the public so that they can make a rational decision. It is not in the doctor's best interest to cure your disease. That's a very bold thing to say, but that's the reality of it. They only treat the symptoms of your disease. The doctors have no idea what caused your disease. We now know what causes disease. It's those four free radicals: superoxide, singlet oxygen, the peroxyl, and the hydroxyl free radical. So we are now on the prevention side of human disease. And the way we measure that now is with the HSCRP. So everyone, when you go into the doctor, you make him run an HSCRP. That doctor works for you. Now, he may look at you and say, "Why do you want that test run?" You say, "I want to know my inflammatory disease state." And it used to be part of the blood work, but they found everybody was in an oxidative disease state that they didn't want to have to explain it. And the doctors had no way of reducing your inflammatory disease state short of steroids or some other prescription, which the side effects were worse than the treatment. Because inflammatory disease is not technically a disease. It's a condition of pre-disease. And so have your doctor run your HSCRP. If that number's under 3, you don't need Valasta.
Oh, really?
You're doing fine. You have
Really?
enough antioxidants. Your inflammatory disease state is what kills people. And if you're under 3 from a systemic inflammatory disease state, I'm not selling a product, and that's not what I do. So if your inflammatory disease state is under control, hey, have at it.
What if it's the Valasta keeping it under control? What if somebody's over 3, they take the Valasta, they come down? Do they stop the Valasta when the number comes down?
No. What happens is now we have a way of controlling it. So if you take Valasta, you drop it below 3, and you say, "Hey, I'm okay." Always remember, it's like a constant stream of water filling up a tank. You may have opened the drain and drained the tank. You shut that off. Guess what's going to happen to the tank? It's going to keep filling up. That's the way our bodies work. Now, you'll be fine for a couple weeks until you hit something stressful in your life, and then all of a sudden your CRP will run up over 10, and you have to get back on Valasta. I'm more of a moderate guy. The way I manage mine is I manage mine between 1.5 and 2.5. So I go in quarterly. I look at my CRP. If I'm running above 2.5, I increase my Valasta dose by I do the chocolate, so I'll increase it by a chocolate segment. I'll run for a little bit, check it again. It might be down around 1.5. At 1.5, I'll take out a chocolate segment or 2,
Well,
and I'll run along. And
yeah, I don't want
it's
to.
just something you
I don't want to confuse anyone with the chocolate, because we I don't want to confuse them, but
with the oil.
yeah,
Yeah.
with the oil. But uh, so I don't know, like, so if somebody's taking, like myself, I'm under CF. I don't know if I've, other than my colitis 20 years ago, I don't know if I've ever been over CRP over 3 every time I've tested myself, but I still take this because
As a preventative.
it's not only inflammation. It says these nutrients in here, right? It's like the
There's olive oil. The polyphenols in the olive oil are great for stopping colon cancer, irritable bowel, but it's always the inflammation that is the problem. The polyphenols act as anti-inflammatories also. Um, but you don't want to get to a position where it creeps up on you. And the moment you start, for example, you take it and you notice a bowel change from more solid to more liquid. That's it. That's inflammation. That's your body sensing that there's an inflammatory issue going on, and it pumps fluid in, or it doesn't extract the fluid from your colon, so you end up with diarrhea. So that's all inflammatory. So there are some symptoms that you can see. Wake up in the morning and check your fingers. I have no arthritis at all, but I'm like you. I'm not going back to where I was. I know what caused my cancer. I know what causes arthritis. I'm investing in the quality of my life, not in the quantity. So I don't want to be in pain. I don't want to have that soreness. But if you wake up in the morning and your fingers are stiff and it takes you a little while to get your knees loosened up, Valasta will stop that. If it's inflammatory, if it's bone on bone or a traumatic injury, Valasta doesn't work there either.
but you were
But
still
there
you were still saying if somebody could have cancer or an inflammatory disease and not have a high CRP. So in
there
those
was a
cases, the Valasta will benefit them as well, right?
it would stop that local inflammation. But it's always you're trying to drive your car in the rearview mirror. It's always after the fact. Um, I contend that if I keep my CRP less than 3, and I can't do that unless I take Valasta.
Got you.
A week after I go off of Valasta, my CRP will run up to about 10. So genetically, I'm at a point in my life where I'm predisposed for an oxidative stress condition. And I've done that. I've done this experiment and I feel lousy. I ache, my joints ache, and just even 24 hours or 48 hours after taking it, after going through that experiment, all my pain goes away.
Got you.
It-
Amazing. So
It's remarkable.
so one more question I get often before we go. So what about applying this topical, like even though it has great protection from getting sunburned, you don't want to put it on your body all over because you look like a monster running around. But from in terms of skin illnesses or like skin cancer, like I had skin cancer in my back, or
Yep,
somebody has a rash or something. Does this help topically?
it does. We have several cases. I've got one I can show, but it's pretty graphic. 1 in 3 inflammatory breast cancers are men. And we had one 82-year-old man was sent home with hospice. The cancer had eaten out through his chest wall. It was inflammatory breast cancer. It was all throughout his chest, but he had a huge gaping hole where the cancer had eaten all the way through. And we began to put it on topically, and he was taking it orally. Within 30 days, the hole had completely healed up. He was declared cancer free. It's an interesting story. He was estranged from his children. He had never seen his grandchildren. And um, when his children found out that he had cancer, they became more receptive to him. Well, when he got cured, they decided to have a family reunion to introduce him to his grandchildren. And he lived for 2 years. And on one such occasion, they went to Oregon to visit with him. He spent all day Saturday playing with his grandchildren, had a wonderful day, a wonderful meal, exhausted, went to bed that night and died in his sleep. But he was totally reconciled with his family. Those kinds of things don't happen by what you and I are doing. There's something else involved here that man cannot explain. I can't explain it. So there's a purpose for all of this, and why it's coming out now, I don't question anymore. If it wasn't you and wasn't me, it would have been somebody else would have figured this out. Um,
I
it,
understand.
it, yeah, it just makes you wake up in the morning and go, wow, we've spent 200 years with man trying to develop drugs that cure cancer. We failed miserably. Now the treatment is more lethal than the disease.
Yeah. Well, Sam, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate the risk you're taking literally on your life to get this information out there and to help people. And I also appreciate everyone that's watching that's tried this and seeking the results and getting the results. So, Sam, thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to put the link below to the Valasta Astaxanthin that you can get from my site right now at rawlife.com, and I have a bunch of videos on my channel, and I'll put some of those links below as well, where you can just do a search for the Valasta Astaxanthin, and it'll come up. Sam, thank you so much, and
Thank
keep
you,
up the
Paul.
great work you're doing.
Thank you, bud.
Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show. Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show. Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life